Welcome to Meet the Author, sponsored by Author Event Network in partnership with Bremerton Public Access Television. I'm your host, Guy Morris. Author Event Network is a non-profit association of local authors who sign books at local festivals, fairs, and events. Our guest today is Clay Vermulm, and he's a new member of the group. Welcome, Clay. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Guy. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, I'm so glad to see you and to meet with you, and I'm excited to be selling with you this summer. It's going to be a busy summer, believe me. Well, we're going to start with some generics. So, Clay, tell us first off, I know that you write horror. Tell us what inspired you to become an author.
I've just always loved stories, like a lot of authors, I think. I was writing from a very young age. You know, I have little notebooks that are written in crayon, like stories that I was writing when I was like 2. Yeah, or well, not 2. I don't think I was fully literate at 2, but when I was very young, writing in crayon, and I always loved monsters, even from a young age. I don't know where that comes from. My mom reads a lot of Stephen King, so maybe it's just straight up genetic. But yeah, it's just been something I've been doing pretty much my whole life.
There's a monster in the cupboard, and why don't you go write about it?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could never reach up to the cupboards or the cookie jar very well. I was always very short, so, you know,
well, that's why the monsters are there, because you can't reach them, and if you could reach them, then they'd have to go away. So, you always want to find the monsters where you don't want to go.
Absolutely.
Well, so who are your favorite, besides Stephen King, who are your favorite horror writers?
I have a lot of horror writers that I like. I think we're in a really cool age. There's a lot of good horror out there. Stephen Graham Jones is bar none my favorite. He's just got so many amazing short stories, and then his novels are awesome too, like Mongrels, the Indian Lake trilogy, and The Only Good Indians, of course. That's one of my favorite novels in the modern age. Alma Katsu is a big favorite of mine. I really like her book, The Fervor, The Deep. Yeah, those are two of my front runners. There's a lot of other ones, but you know, I could go on and on about them.
I write thrillers, so I haven't quite got into the shock of the horror quite yet. I got to sleep at some point. So we already talked about the genres that you write in horror. Well, tell us about the themes and that you want your readers to really kind of pick up. I know that Stephen King, some people write more psychological stuff. Some people write gory stuff. Some people like, you know, vampires and zombies and things like that. Tell us about the themes of your book.
Yeah, I usually approach definitely psychological horror, first of all, and I'm a big fan of the slow burn horror. You know, I love like movies by Robert Eggers. I love The Babadook, these movies that really take their time and deliver the horror sort of piecemeal and sort of force you to come to terms with it and figure it out as you go along. Because I really think it's hard to scare people on the page compared to on the screen. You don't really have the benefit of the jump scare or the gore or these sort of other things that can aid in fear or in like shock value. You can do some shock value in writing, obviously, you know, by really vivid descriptions and visceral details, but like psychological horror is so much scarier to me, making people really ruminate with it and sort of that sense of dread just building throughout the book. And that is all built from the ground up at a character level, right? Okay. Like if people don't care about the characters, they won't care if they die. So that's why I think the psychological horror is the most powerful, bar none. And the themes that I usually explore that through are isolation and grief, primarily right now. It definitely varies by book, of course. But I've been in this period of writing about a lot of grief lately because I find it's such a profound playground for exploring the human condition. Just like the way different people process grief and handle it, and the way it kind of comes home with you, you know, no matter where it happens or who it happens to, whether it's your friend, it's you, it's your wife, your partner, whatever. That stuff, it all comes home with you, and you have to live with it every day. Like, cope with it how you will. You don't forget about it all the way if it's real deep grief, and there's something truly terrifying about that. I've been exploring that a lot. And then the other thing is isolation, because I think two of the biggest inherent human fears are the unknown and, you know, the separation from the pack. And those two things in combination are very scary just inherently. And so you can go all kinds of places with that. Anything you add to that is going to exponentially increase the fear level, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I mostly explore in my work right now.
That's interesting. It's I mean, grief is certainly something that we all deal with in different ways, and certainly that can force its own level of isolation, and just sort of lack of joy in the simple things in life, which can kind of make it bearable. And there's certainly a lot of things for people to be grieving these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both in personal lives, public lives, political lives, everything else. Was there anything in your personal experiences? Now, you mentioned that your mom grew up reading Stephen King, but was there anything in your personal experiences that you felt compelled to share in your books? How do you kind of bleed your own griefs and stories and traumas and fears into what you write?
Yeah, I mean, I think in every writer's work, there's a fair amount of bleed over from the personal psyche. One of the reasons I might be so interested in the isolation factor is I grew up on a farm, kind of out of town.
Okay.
Not like super far, but far enough that you definitely can't walk to town, Grew up on a farm, and just very much, I didn't have a whole lot of connection with people my own age in school. I went to public school and everything. I was on the wrestling team, so I had these things, but they were always kind of organized around wrestling or some sort of organized activity. I didn't have a lot of like free form recreation with people my age. So I think that's probably part of it. I always was kind of just out on the farm with my brother, and it was just kind of us two a lot of the time. We were 5 years apart, so there's plenty of like rivalry there. And then where the grief's concerned, some of that is a bit recent, like a couple close losses in the family, unfortunately, in the last couple years. Thank you. And I think I've been sort of like covertly grieving lots of like little things throughout my life. Like my dad got in a very serious injury when I was 11, and he suffers a lot from it these days. He still works and everything, but he's got very severe nerve damage, and that definitely did some damage to our family dynamic. We all get along. We have a good family structure and everything, but it was certainly altered drastically at that point of our lives. So that probably bleeds into if I'm taking kind of a bird's eye view of it all.
Well, yeah, and what I'm trying to kind of get at is I think as authors, we always allow our own lives to kind of bleed into our characters and our themes, and there's something about that, and that brings the authenticity.
Yeah.
Right. Of knowing, what are some of the ways of dealing with something like a grief or something like isolation. I grew up in the inner city, so I was always like, okay, all you people just got to get away from me.
Yeah.
A little personal space doesn't never hurt anybody.
Yeah. The opposite.
That's right.
Kinda.
However, I go out to the farm and I immediately start feeling like there's nobody here. This is a little creepy. I think I want to go back to the city.
Yeah. There's nothing quite like that silence.
That's right. You always want to see the mugger coming at you.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the title of your book, and is this part of a series? So tell us about the book and tell us a little bit about the characters and what we're going to experience here.
Yeah, so this is actually a short story collection. This is my cutting my teeth as an acquisitional editor.
Oh, okay.
So I have a story in here, which is very related to the farm conversation. The story is about a woman who is trying to sell her family home that her parents built, and her father's ghost still haunts the premises. So it's very much a story of like, at what cost do you preserve your family legacy, and do you honor the wishes of your deceased loved ones? Because I have to think about that all the time as a guy who moved off the farm, who does not work as a farmer at all, and frankly, I don't have an eighth of the skills required to do what my dad does. So I'm like fully cognizant of this, but I also want to honor my family legacy on some level. So that's the themes explored in that story, which is called For Sale by Owner. It's the first story in the collection. And then the others, we did this in conjunction with 9 other authors, and we just split the profits equally, 10% across the board.
Okay.
And everybody I found was kind of like a somewhat emerging author to some capacity. For several of them, it's one of their first published pieces. For others, they're kind of more where I am, where they publish a few things, but they definitely don't have like a super strong footing yet, where, you know, it may be their only job or whatever. So that was kind of the goal of the piece. I call it collaborative publishing. It's a really big goal of mine with Clay Vermulm Fiction, which is my like indie publishing imprint.
Okay.
Is to help other authors, help newer authors find a place for their work, and then also to help people find a place for reprints, because I think that's a big thing. But that's a whole different question. Focusing more on the story. Bad Spirits, it's called that because the submission call we put out, we were just looking for unique takes on folkloric creatures, cryptids, and malevolent spirits. So that's kind of the common thread that runs through this. But aside from that, we took stuff from all over the place.
Okay.
So that's kind of the cool thing about Bad Spirits. It has lots of different subgenres in there. It has cosmic horror, it has body horror, it has psychological horror in my book, and it even has like kind of a thriller in there as well. Okay. So it's pretty encompassing. So I think if you're just a general fan of the horror genre, this would be a good one for you. And it would also be good for people who maybe want to try out some other little tasters of the other subgenres, but they may have one they particularly like. It's probably in here, and you can start with it, and then you can sample the others.
Interesting. Well, I know I moved out here a few years ago, and this is the first time I've been out in the woods. I have not, I'm disappointed. Sasquatch has not haunted me or banged on my door once. I'm starting to think it's all stories. So how do you choose now the books that will suit? How do you kind of pick the premises for writing a horror a novel for your audience? How do you find new things that kind of haven't been done before? Where do you go for that inspiration?
I am a big subscriber to Stephen King's idea that inspiration isn't something you go looking for; it's something that just hits you. And I have found that to be pretty true. Like. I draw a lot of inspiration from the way comedians look at the world. I do kind of consider them our modern philosophers, but just trying to, like, if you look at the world and you try to think about mundane situations and then what's absurd about them, what's funny about them, what's scary about them, that's kind of where I draw my inspiration, I guess. So, like, for example, I have a story called Lucians. I got this idea that, like, what if cannibalism was socially accepted? Right? And then I was like, well, what circumstances would that require? And so I built on that, and I came up with this like sci-fi horror where there's a machine that regenerates your tissue immediately. So you go in with your partner, you hack off the piece you want to eat, and then it regrows. So, like, is cannibalism okay if nobody actually gets hurt or dies? And those are kind of the weird ideas that I get. Usually when I'm in the shower or somewhere else where I have no physical ability to write, like on the freeway. And then I'm a big fan of On Writing by Stephen King. It's kind of my Bible. And I also like his idea of the idea sifter, he calls it. He kind of believes that the notebook where you write every idea ever down is a bad idea. I'm somewhere in the middle, but I do agree that I don't need to write down every idea immediately. So I do let ideas just kind of like ruminate in my brain. Right. I let myself forget ideas, and the ones that stay after like a week or two, those are the ones I write down. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, that's okay. With just a conversation, we're exploring this. So what kind of research do you do? Once you have kind of an idea, do you think, okay, well, if I'm going to write about this cannibalism, I need to go research other cannibals, and of course, Jeffrey Dahmer comes to mind. From a real life perspective, how much research do you do when you're actually kind of building these narratives out?
Yeah, I guess it varies. It varies on the story. It varies on how much I already know, of course. But, you know, I just always try to do enough research that I can represent all the demographics and themes appropriately and to a sufficient degree. I don't want to upset anybody, and I don't want to misrepresent anybody. So as long as I feel that I can do that, that's about how much research I do.
Okay.
But I am a very much a pretty free form kind of writer, so I don't do much plotting or anything. So usually I just kind of like draft the story. If I don't know something, I just put it in brackets and say, come back and fix this. And then I do the research from there.
Okay.
But I definitely write from a place of put two characters in a situation and see what they do.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I always find it different, the fascination, the difference between the plotters and the pansters, and you know, how do you start a story and then actually end up someplace when you don't really know where you're going, and it's a unique kind of skill in storytelling that way. Well, now, do all of your I know this is not your only book. Do all of your stories kind of take place in the same sort of location, time frame? Do you go back and forth in time? Do you explore different locations? Tell us about the environment, the world of your books.
Yeah, the nice thing about being a horror writer is you can set things contemporarily, so you don't have to like do the fantasy work of creating a whole world. So I do choose to set most things kind of contemporary. I do have a couple like historical horrors, but still they're set in the real world, just with supernatural elements that exist. However, I do have like a series I'm working on. All those take place in Washington. I'm working on another anthology of short stories that all take place in Washington. I like to write about where I am. I do like to write. I read a lot of like mountain stories and hiking stories and climbing stories, isolation, and Washington's such a great state for that. So is Montana.
It always struck me as creepy.
Yeah.
I'm from Southern California, so you know I'm used to going out. 90% of the time, it's another perfect day in LA.
Yeah.
So you know, you come up here like, oh, you know, we had teaser days last week.
Yep.
Thinking, oh my gosh, the beautiful weather's coming. Okay, well that was a tease.
Yeah, that was just a gap between storms.
That's right, just a gap between storms, exactly. Well, tell us about the main character in your book, and do you write? Do you tend to write more female or male characters? How do you find your male characters, and who are they based on?
Well, I do tend to write more female characters. I don't know why that is. It just kind of happens that way. I even often start my characters as being gender neutral, just because I let them decide kind of what they're going to be. And I don't know, they tend towards female. I've actually been actively trying to correct that because I realized I wrote like 6 stories in a row that were all female protagonists. I was like, I should probably write some male protagonists. I guess since you asked specific characters, I will gravitate towards my series, which is not this book. But I have characters in there. It's a mountain climbing series, so it's going to be a trilogy, and it's all about a sort of skin changer creature in the mountains that starts feeding on the recreational outdoors people of the PNW. It takes place out by Darrington, if you know where that is. All the locations are real. And those characters are inspired by sort of the 3 different demographics in climbing that I have identified. So they all kind of...
Are you an outdoorsman then?
I am, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so you're getting a lot of that from your own personal experience.
Yep.
Okay.
I do. I've been a rock climber for about 8 years on a more serious level. And then I do some surfing. I'm very amateur at that. And then I do a little bit of backpacking and hiking. Stuff like that. So the climbing is all very much a big passion of mine and something that has become pretty in vogue. So it's also pretty topical, and I like that part of it as well. But yeah, in my book Crevasse, the characters are based on climber demographics. They all kind of represent a different demographic, like the new age climbers, the old school climbers, and then the kind of liminal climbers in between those two that are walking that boundary, if that makes sense.
Well, you know, I being eaten by a cryptid while I'm out in the woods is one of the reasons I get most of my outdoor experience on YouTube.
Yeah.
I was a sailor. I was willing to swim with the sharks, but you put me around with bears and mountain lions, and it's like, okay, they're faster than I am. We're with one more question. I want to. I think we covered that. I think we covered some of your outdoor stuff too as well. So tell us about sort of where you want to go next with your next books. You mentioned some more anthologies. Do you have any other great stories that are kind of ruminating in your head, and tell us about that?
Yeah, my big project I'm working on right now is with Tamara Selman. I know you know her. We're doing this podcast / writing project together called Beneath the Rain Shadow.
Okay.
And every month we alternate who writes and who gives a prompt. All of our prompts are threefold. There's a location in the PNW, a PNW quirk, and a horror trope.
Okay.
So I come with like those three, then Tamara writes a story based on that prompt, and then we alternate. And by the end of the year, we'll have 12 short stories, all set in the PNW, and we'll collect them into an anthology called Beneath the Rain Shadow. And then we're co-hosting this podcast where we critique the last person's written story on air every month.
Tamara's one of our members. She's a great poet.
She's awesome.
She really is an awesome personality and very courageous. She's dealing with her MS and writing about it and talking about it and presenting it. And we're really pleased to have her in the team. So tell us, as one final question, tell us about, this is your first year with Author Event Network.
Yeah.
So tell us about what your expectations and hopes are.
I just hope to get out there and meet more people. I find word of mouth is by far the most effective way to sell your books and build your platform.
Yep.
No matter what they tell you about social media, word of mouth is the most important.
Yeah.
And meeting people in person. I've had quite a bit of success selling books that way compared to online, honestly. So I'm just excited to have more opportunities to get to some of these bigger events, to meet more authors, and to see more people face to face, and just build my network from that sort of platform. That's what I prefer.
You know, an author we spend 98% of our time, in isolation.
Yeah.
Behind a computer, doing research, writing words, hoping that it'll somehow connect with somebody. And those times when you can actually get out in front of the audience and actually engage with them directly is sort of the muse.
Yeah.
That we say, I got to go back and write more. This is really great interaction. Well, Clay, thank you so much for having you. I'm excited to be selling with you this summer. You've got some really interesting books. I'm excited to learn more about those. This is Author Vet Network. I want to thank the Bremerton Public Access Television Station for their partnership, and we look forward to seeing all of you out at the various festivals, fairs, and events in the Seattle and Portland areas and Kitsap areas. Welcome to Meet the Author, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.